"Do you think we could start right here?" The words fell into the half-lit hallway like a drop of ink in clear water, spreading slow and quiet, staining everything between them. Julia froze, halfway through wiping down the marble counter. Her hands were raw from bleach and cheap gloves, but it was not the sting that made her pause. It was his voice. Alexander Grant stood in the doorway of his own office, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly out of place, like even the night could not tame him. No one should have been here at this hour, not the billionaire with 3 floors of glass empire above the city, not the cleaning woman whose name no one cared to learn. They had both stepped outside the lines without permission. Julia looked at the rag in her hand, a gray smear across white marble. She thought about her mother, waiting back in their tiny apartment, about the rules she had made for herself. Never talk, never linger, never let them see you. And yet here he was, looking at her like she was not invisible at all. "I'm sorry," she said too quickly. "I'll finish up and get out of your way." Alexander did not move. He leaned one shoulder against the frame, the soft hum of the city behind him, like this was just another meeting room, just another deal on the table. "Do you think we could start right here?" he repeated, softer this time. The way his eyes held hers made her wonder if he was asking about the counter or something much bigger. Julia straightened her back. She had learned to keep her head down, shoulders rounded, eyes low. It kept her safe. It kept people from asking questions she did not want to answer. But tonight, something in his voice pulled her chin up. "Start what?" she asked carefully. English was her second language, but she knew exactly what his words could mean. She just did not trust them yet. Alexander did not smile. His eyes flicked to the rag in her hand, then back to her face. "I've been watching you." She stiffened. That sounded wrong, dangerous. But the way he said it felt different. Not like a man looking for entertainment, but like a man who had found an answer to a question he had been afraid to ask. "You clean this place every night. You fix what everyone else leaves behind. You make it so this empire still shines in the morning. But you don't look away from what's broken. You see it." Julia let out a small, dry laugh. She was tired. "I don't fix empires, Mr. Grant. I just clean up the crumbs." He stepped closer. She smelled coffee and rain on him, like he had been standing outside thinking too long. Maybe he had been watching the lights. Maybe he had been watching her. "What if there's more than crumbs?" he said, his voice low. "More than marble floors and fingerprints. What if there's a door, right here, one you could open for yourself?" Julia shook her head. She knew this game. She knew how men like him played with girls like her, until the lights came back on, until the tabloids snapped a photo, until her mother asked why she was on the news and not on the bus home. "I'm just the cleaning staff," she said. "I'm almost done." But she did not move. Neither did he. They stood there, 2 people on the wrong side of the clock in a building made of glass and secrets. "Tell me your name," Alexander said, ignoring the rag and the way her shoulders tensed. "Say it, so I can stop calling you the woman who keeps saving me without even knowing it." "Julia Reyes," she said after a breath. Her voice was steady when nothing else felt steady at all. Alexander nodded slowly. "Julia Reyes." He said it like he was trying it out on his tongue, tasting each syllable like it was the start of a promise. "We could start right here," he said again, softer than before, but this time Julia did not look away. Julia Reyes had spent most of her life learning how not to be seen. She was 12 when her mother pulled her across the border in the back of a rusted truck, squeezed between boxes of stolen fruit. By 15, she was fluent enough to clean houses without drawing attention. By 19, she was scrubbing lecture halls at night while trying to stay awake in design classes by day. By 21, she was dropping out when her mother's heart gave up and the hospital bills did not. By 29, she had mastered the art of vanishing in plain sight. Every night she stepped through the revolving doors of Grant Holdings, a ghost among glass and marble. No one noticed the girl with the mop and the spray bottle. That was how she liked it. The fewer eyes on her, the less chance she would slip up, say the wrong word, lose the fragile hold she had on this life she built out of quiet and shadows. Her mother always said, "Stay small, stay invisible, that way no one can take what you have." Julia took that advice and tucked it deep in her pocket, along with the crumpled paycheck she never cashed all at once. She wore plain jeans and soft sneakers, kept her hair tied back in a tight knot. Her hands smelled of bleach even on days she did not work. Some nights, when the building went still, she found herself pausing by the wide glass wall of the executive floor, staring at the skyline, wondering what it would feel like to breathe that high up without worrying about falling. She had a secret, though, folded between her bills and bleach cloths, a battered sketchbook, its cover cracked and edges worn soft like old denim. Inside were pages of lines and notes, floor plans, corners she imagined softer, spaces more open than the stiff offices she cleaned. She called them open spaces. She drew them for herself, for the girl who once believed she might design something more than a life spent wiping away someone else's mess. No one knew about the sketchbook except the night. Sometimes she left it in her locker under the spare uniform. Other nights, she carried it in her tote bag, pressed flat against her side like armor. That night, the night Alexander Grant found her alone with her rag and her dreams, she had left the book on a low shelf in the executive kitchen. A stupid mistake. When she turned around, he was holding it, fingers brushing the edge of the cover like it was glass he could shatter. Alexander Grant had a reputation built from silence and sharp edges. People said he never slept, never stayed still, never forgave a bad deal. He did not smile for cameras and barely smiled for people. His empire of glass and chrome stretched 50 stories into the sky because he refused to settle for ground level. But none of that matched the man who stood barefoot on the marble tiles at 2 a.m, sleeves pushed up, hair damp at the temple, thumb tracing the corner of her worn notebook. He looked tired in a way money could not fix. He looked at her like he was seeing something money could not buy. When Julia tried to snatch the book back, he did not pull it away. He turned a page instead. He saw the lines she had drawn, the corners she had softened, the rooms she had opened up, like a promise that maybe there was space for someone like her. "You drew these," he said that first night, voice low like he was afraid to break the spell between them. She nodded. He asked why. She lied and told him it helped her pass the time. He laughed once, short and sharp, and told her that was the first time he had heard someone call this empire of cold glass a place that needed warmth. After that night, she tried to be more careful. She hid the notebook deeper in her bag. She cleaned faster, kept her eyes down when she passed his office. But some nights he was still there, waiting in the shadows, leaning on a desk that cost more than everything she owned. He never asked her to stay, but he never told her to leave either. In the break room, someone once told her Alexander Grant had no family left, no soft place to land when the boardroom lights turned off. Julia did not believe that. Men like him always landed somewhere safe. People like her were the ones who learned to hit the ground and not complain when it hurt. Still, every time she wiped the glass door of his corner office, she paused just long enough to see her own reflection next, to his name engraved in steel. Reyes, Grant, 2 words that would never belong side by side. That was before he asked her if they could start something right there, in the hush of the hallway, with her hands still smelling like bleach and a rag turning gray against her skin. He did not offer her a contract or a promise. He offered her a question that was somehow more dangerous. Julia thought if she stayed quiet long enough, the moment would dissolve like so many late-night conversations that never happened. She scrubbed harder, filled her bucket, emptied trash cans with extra force, hoping the echo of plastic bags would drown out the echo of his voice in her head. She told herself Alexander Grant would forget her name as quickly as he had learned it. He was a man who collected companies, not people. He would close the door, lock away her sketches, and leave her where she belonged, on the edges, out of focus. But he did not forget. The next night, when she stepped into the executive floor, her cart was gone from the usual corner. In its place sat a single paper cup, steam curling through the cold air. She almost dropped her keys when she saw the note under it. Just one line in neat block letters. "You forgot this." Inside the cup was not coffee but peppermint tea. The same tea she sometimes left brewing in the break room for herself when no one was watching. She told herself it was a coincidence. But Alexander Grant was not a man of coincidences. She threw the cup away without drinking it. She finished her shift in silence. The next night, the tea was there again, waiting in the same spot. She almost laughed because it was so ridiculous, this small war of warm liquid and stubborn silence. She drank it that time, standing by the huge windows, watching the city blink under a sky she could not name her own. After that, it became a ritual neither of them spoke of. Some nights she would find him still in his office, tie loose, collar open, staring at slides that never seemed to change. He would not look up when she entered, but he would stand to the side as if to say, "This space is yours too." Sometimes she would find the sketchbook on his desk, open to a page she did not remember showing him. A corner, a hallway, a line of soft chairs beside a wall of plants. He never wrote in it, never changed her lines, but his fingerprints were there in the small coffee stains on the edge of the paper, in the way the pages sometimes lay flatter than she left them. One night she stayed longer than she should have. She was tired, her knees hurt from scrubbing tile grout, and her mother's coughing fit on the phone earlier made her feel like no amount of clean floors could wipe away what waited at home. She found herself leaning against the window, sketchbook balanced on the railing. Her pen scratched quietly, one more open space blooming where none existed before. She did not hear him approach until his voice broke the hush. "You should be charging for that." She did not turn. "If I charged for it, you would find a way to own it." He laughed, a sound so low it made the glass vibrate against her shoulder. "What if I did not want to own it, Julia? What if I wanted to build it exactly as you see it?" She turned then, met his eyes. The city glowed behind him. He looked tired, almost human, almost reachable. "You want to build open spaces for who? Your boardroom sharks?" He shook his head. "For people who forget they deserve to be seen. For people like you." She bristled. "I do not need your charity." He stepped closer. His shadow fell over the edge of her page. "This is not charity. It is a chance." She snapped the notebook shut so hard the sound cracked the quiet. "I am not for sale." Her voice did not tremble, and she hated how proud that made her feel. He said nothing as she shoved the sketchbook into her bag, but when she turned to leave, he said her name like it was an apology. "Julia." She kept walking, the echo of her sneakers tapping out her answer down the hallway. The next few nights she avoided the top floor altogether. She swapped routes with another janitor, cleaned the lower levels, restrooms, conference rooms, that smelled of stale coffee and aftershave. But even there, his presence reached her. She found a new cup of peppermint tea on the staff fridge, with a note folded under the lid. "You left your corner unfinished." She tore the note into tiny pieces and flushed them down the break room sink. She told herself she was done. She was the invisible girl again. She told herself the door he offered was just another trap, a pretty promise for a man bored with empty offices. But she was not done. Because one night, a week later, she found herself on the elevator after her shift, holding the sketchbook in her hands. Her fingers brushed over the spine until she felt the soft tear where the cover had begun to split. She could feel him in the pages now, his voice tangled in the pencil lines. She almost pressed the button for the lobby, but her thumb hovered over the key for the 72nd floor. The doors closed, the numbers climbed. She told herself she was not going to give it to him. She was going to say no properly, to his face, to the marble floor and the glass walls and every hidden camera she imagined watching her every move. When the doors slid open, she found him alone at his desk, no lights except the wash of the city below. He looked up, and something in his eyes softened when he saw her. Before he could speak, she held up the book like a shield. "I came to get this back." He nodded. "I know." He stood and walked around the desk, stopping an arm's length away. "Do you ever think about what you drew?" She hated that her throat tightened every day. "Then why do you hide it?" "Because people like me do not get rooms like this." She swept her arm at the wide windows, the corner office bigger than her entire apartment. "People like me clean them." He said nothing for a moment, then he reached for the sketchbook. She flinched but did not pull it away. He flipped it open, turning to the page she always came back to. A common room, big windows, soft chairs, a sign above the glass door, "Open space." He tapped the words gently. "Build it with me, Julia." She shook her head. "I do not need your money." He smiled, small, tired. "I know. That is what makes you dangerous." She should have walked out then, should have slammed the door on whatever this was, but instead she asked, "Why me?" He met her eyes. "Because you see the dirt and you stay anyway. Because you fix what you can, because you know how to leave quietly, but you are still here." She hated him for saying that out loud. She hated him for standing so close. Her fingers ached to touch his shirt just to prove he was real. She hated how part of her wanted to believe him. That night, she left with the sketchbook pressed tight to her chest. She told herself she was done. She told herself she would file transfer papers, find another building, another set of glass walls that did not remember her name. But the next morning, when her alarm went off before sunrise, she found herself sitting on the kitchen floor beside her mother's old kettle, flipping through the pages again. The pencil lines blurred in the thin dawn light. She traced her finger over the corner room, the soft chairs, the words she wrote at 16 when she thought someday she might design something worth sitting in. That night when she stepped back into Grant Holdings, she expected to find nothing. She expected him to have moved on, closed the door, locked her out like he did with all the people who did not fit his perfect empire. But when she reached her usual corner, she found a folded piece of paper on top of her cart. A blueprint. Not hers this time, but his. Her lines, redrawn with crisp ink. A layout for the top floor she cleaned every night. Open space at the top in her own handwriting, scanned and placed like it belonged. Julia stood there under the humming fluorescent lights, bucket by her side, gloves half pulled on, staring at the plan like it was an insult or an invitation, or maybe both. She should have ripped it up. She should have thrown it away and walked out the door like her mother would have told her. Instead, she slipped it into her bag. Julia knew taking the blueprint was a mistake, but she could not help herself. She sat at her small kitchen table that night long after her mother had fallen asleep and spread the papers out beside her battered sketchbook. Side by side, her pencil lines and his crisp ink made something that almost looked possible. She traced the edges of the new walls he had drawn, the open corners, the softened glass where her words still sat. Open space. Her thumb brushed the paper as if it could answer the one question that kept her awake. Why me? 2 nights passed before she saw him again. She avoided the top floor, cleaned only the lower levels, refused to ride the elevator past 50, but the building had its own gravity. It pulled her back, whether she liked it or not. On the 3rd night, she found him waiting in the same spot where he had first spoken her name. He did not smile when she stepped out of the service elevator. He just held up her sketchbook like an offering. "You left it again." She looked at the floor, at his shoes, at the smear of city light on the marble, but not at his eyes. "I do not want your plans," she said. He answered calmly. "They are not mine, they are yours. I just redrew them so they would be harder to ignore." Julia shook her head. "Do you think this makes me yours?" He laughed once, low, without humor. "If I thought that you would not still be here telling me no." She hated how true that was. She crossed her arms. The rubber gloves still clutched in one hand. "Why do you care about my lines, Mr. Grant? You could hire 100 designers." He leaned against the wall, arms folded but not defensive, more like a man trying to stand still for once. You know what they said about me when I bought this building, that I was a boy who never stayed in one place long enough to make it feel like home. He paused, eyes fixed on the city beyond the glass. They were right. I bought more floors, more glass, more empty space, but none of it felt like it could hold me. Julia almost laughed at that. You think a soft chair and a wall of plants will save you. He looked at her then, and for the first time she saw it. Not the billionaire, not the shark they whispered about, but the man who ate takeout alone at his desk, who fell asleep beside a window instead of a bed. It is not about saving me, Julia, he said quietly. It is about giving people like you a place to stand where no one can pretend not to see you. Her throat tightened. She wanted to throw his words back at him, tell him he was just lonely, that this was just another transaction dressed in sincerity. But the truth hovered too close to her ribs. Part of her wanted to believe it. That same part remembered the security guard who once called her the ghost, the HR lady who forgot her name every month when payroll came late, the woman at the agency who said, "Be grateful you get paid at all." Julia stepped closer, closing the gap that had always been theirs. You do not know what you are asking for, she said. If you build this with my name on it, people will talk. They will say I slept my way into your good graces. They will say I am a cleaning girl playing designer so you can pat yourself on the back for lifting someone up. Alexandra nodded slowly. Let them talk. You know what they will not be able to say? That you stayed invisible. Julia stared at him. The hum of the city below filled the silence. She wanted to scream or laugh or maybe just drop her gloves and run, but she did none of those things. She reached into her bag, pulled out the blueprint he had given her days ago, and unfolded it between them. Her finger tapped the corner room, the one she always dreamed of. If I say yes, she said slowly, I choose how it looks. I choose how it works. He nodded once like he had been waiting for her to claim it. Yours, he said. She almost believed him until the whispers started. A week later, Julia found her locker open, the sketchbook gone. She found it later, not hidden, but pinned to the staff notice board by a yellow pushpin, open to a page she never meant for anyone to see. Beside it, a note scrawled in red marker. Ask her how she got that billionaire's attention. Julia's chest burned. She ripped the book down, shoved it into her bag, but the damage was done. In the break room, 2 janitors went silent when she walked in. One of them, a woman named Carla, who once split her last sandwich with Julia, refused to meet her eyes. By the time she made it home that night, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. You should be careful. No name, no threat. Just those 5 words in silence. Julia sat on her bed, back against the wall, sketchbook open in her lap, but she could not see the lines. She saw only herself, reflected in the cracked screen of her cheap phone, the invisible girl made visible for the worst reasons. When Alexander called, she did not pick up. He called again and again, until her mother poked her head through the door, asking in Spanish if she was in trouble. Julia wanted to lie, but her throat would not let her. She whispered back, Not yet. She did not show up to work the next night, or the one after that. Instead, she sat at the library on 26th Street, hunched over her sketchbook, redrawing every line she had ever given him. If they were going to smear her name, she would at least keep the parts of herself they could not steal. On the 4th day, she found him waiting on the front steps of her building, a place he had no business standing in his suit and polished shoes. When she tried to walk past him, he stepped in front of her, blocking the door. You did not answer, he said. She shoved the sketchbook at his chest. You want my lines so badly? Take them. I do not need your empire or your tea or your pity. He held the book but did not look at it. Julia, he started, but she cut him off. No, I know what this is. A rich man, bored with walls, wanting to look generous, while he plays savior to the help. You think you can fix me with a soft chair and an open corner, but you cannot fix where I came from. You cannot fix what people see when they look at me. He did not flinch. I do not want to fix you. I want you to be seen. She laughed, sharp and bitter. I have been seen. You did that. Congratulations, now go back to your glass box. She turned to leave, but he grabbed her wrist. Not hard, not enough to hurt, just enough to hold her in place for one more breath. They already think they know who you are, Julia. Let them be wrong. She pulled her hand free. Then let them be wrong without me. When she got home, she locked the door behind her, sat on the floor with her back against it, and let the tears come. Not because she wanted him back, but because part of her had wanted him to be different. She wanted the blueprint to be more than a bribe, the tea more than a trick, the open space more than just empty words. The next day, she put on her cleanest shirt, walked into a small design firm 3 blocks from the library and asked for an internship. No pay, no promise, just a chance to sit at a real table with real plans. The receptionist looked at her gloves stuffed in her pocket, at the bleach stains on her jeans, and almost laughed her out of the lobby. But the head designer, a middle-aged woman with a streak of white hair, asked to see her book. Julia handed it over, hands steady this time. The woman flipped through the pages, silent for a long time, then looked up with something like respect in her eyes. We cannot pay you much, the woman said, but you can have a desk. Julia walked out an hour later. The cheap paper badge clipped to her shirt felt heavier than anything Alexander Grant had ever offered her. She did not text him to tell him. She did not owe him that. If he wanted her lines, he could steal them like everyone else did. But that night, when she lay in bed, the city humming below her, she found herself tracing her finger over the cover of the sketchbook. The corner was torn where his thumb had once rested, soft as a prom. She closed her eyes and told herself she was done needing him. Maybe she was telling the truth. Julia had always thought rock bottom would feel like silence, but it felt more like a hum under her ribs, a quiet engine that refused to die, even when the world pushed her back into the dark corners where she started. Each morning she woke to her mother's soft breathing in the other room, the thin apartment walls barely holding in the warmth she scraped together. She packed her sketchbook alongside the plastic lunchbox she still used from high school. She walked 10 blocks to the design firm where no one knew her name. Yet, and that was a mercy, in that little office with its flickering lights and secondhand furniture, Julia sat at a folding desk beside a window that overlooked the back of a laundromat. She drew corners again, rough lines at first, then sharper curves, open doorways, soft lights spilling where before there had only been walls. Her boss never asked about the billionaire. If the woman knew the whispers, she did not say so. She only paused sometimes at Julia's desk, fingers tapping the edge of the pages like she was checking the pulse of something fragile and alive. Meanwhile, the city kept talking. It did not care that Julia Reyes was done with Alexander Grant. The rumor mill spun louder than her silence could contain. A grainy photo of her stepping out of a black car that was not hers made the rounds online. Comment sections filled with guesses about what she was to him, how far she would go, what she had already given. Julia tried not to read them, but sometimes on the bus home, her thumb betrayed her. She stared at words that called her a gold digger, a nobody, a girl too brown to be anything but a good story for a man who needed saving. She hated how easy it was for strangers to cut her open without even learning her name. One night, after another long shift, she stepped off the bus and nearly walked into him. Alexander stood under the street lamp like he belonged nowhere else, coat open, shirt sleeves rolled, the cold wind lifting his hair from his forehead. She wanted to keep walking, but he moved first, blocking her path without touching her. You should not be here, Julia said, keeping her voice low. He shook his head. Neither should you. She looked away at the cracked sidewalk, the faint smell of fried food drifting from a cart on the corner. What do you want, Alexander? He looked at her like the answer was obvious. I want you to come back. She let out a soft, tired laugh. You do not get to want that. You do not get to stand on my street and ask me to fix your half-built dream while my name is still smeared all over your world like dirt you cannot wash off. He stepped closer, his shadow covering the frayed hem of her jeans. "I did not want this, Julia. I never wanted to hurt you." She met his eyes, forcing her chin up so he would see the fight left in her. "You do not get to be sorry. You had your empire, your glass walls, your boardroom nods. I was just the girl with the mop, remember?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "I know what you are to me." His voice cracked on the last word so quiet she almost missed it. She hated how her chest squeezed when she heard that break. She wanted to shove him back into his car, his meetings, his safe world, but her hands stayed at her sides. She turned to go, but he caught her wrist again, gentle but unyielding. "They are killing it," he said suddenly. She stopped. "Killing what?" "The project," he said, breathing out like the words tasted sour. "The board wants it buried. They say it is bad optics now that you are gone. They want me to apologize, walk away, pretend it was just an experiment." Julia almost laughed at how absurd it was. Maybe it was. "Maybe I was just an experiment." He shook his head. "No." His grip tightened like he was afraid she would slip through him again. "They can kill the project, but they cannot kill what you drew." "I cannot." She pulled her hand free, the cold biting at her wrist where his warmth had been. "So what, Alexander? You want me to step back in so you can play the hero. You want me to stand behind you while you smile for the cameras and pretend you saved the poor cleaning girl with a pretty sketchbook." His eyes flashed. "I want you to stand next to me." She stepped back, shaking her head. "I am done standing behind anyone. If you want this built, do it yourself. Or better yet, give my lines to someone who knows what they are worth." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded page she recognized immediately. The blueprint, the one he had redrawn with her name at the top. He held it out to her, but she did not take it. "I do not need that anymore," she said. "I have my own table now." He looked at the paper, then at her, then slowly folded it again, slipping it back into his coat. "Then build it," he said, voice rough like gravel. "Build it without me." She nodded, once the lump in her throat too tight to swallow. "I will." He stepped aside and she walked past him, shoulders square, eyes on the open door of her building, where the warm light from the hallway spilled out onto the cold sidewalk. She did not look back. But that night she lay awake staring at the ceiling, paint cracked from the winter damp. She thought about the corner room, the soft chairs, the space that had always felt like home in her mind, but never in her hands. She thought about how it could still be built, how it could still belong to someone more than herself. 2 weeks passed. Julia buried herself in drafts and site visits, the small studio becoming a second home. She shared her desk with another intern, a young man who asked too many questions, but laughed at her terrible jokes. She found herself waking up before the alarm, hungry to draw again. One Friday morning she stepped into the studio to find her boss waiting by her desk. "There is a reporter here," the older woman said, eyes narrowed. "He says he wants to talk to you about Mr. Grant." Julia's stomach sank. "I have nothing to say about him." The boss nodded. "That is what I told him. But he says you might want to see this." She found the reporter sitting in the cramped lobby, cup of cheap coffee in hand. He looked young, maybe fresh out of school, but his eyes were sharp. He handed her a tablet. On it was a leaked email from Grant Holdings. A shutdown notice. The entire floor she once cleaned, the blueprint they had fought over, the name, open space, all of it marked for demolition. Julia felt the anger rise sharp and clean. "So what do you want?" she asked. The reporter leaned forward, voice low. "I think the city should know the truth, not the rumor. The truth, that this was yours before it was his, that they are burying it because they cannot bury you." She stared at him, heart pounding. "If I do this, people will say I want attention," she said. He shrugged. "Maybe they will. Maybe they will say a brown girl does not get to stand on the same stage as a billionaire. Maybe they will say worse. But they will have to say your name while they do it." Julia thought of her mother, her tiny apartment, her old gloves that still smelled like bleach even after 3 washes. She thought of the empty corners she still dreamed about in quiet moments. She thought of Alexander Grant standing under a street lamp saying he wanted her to stand beside him. Maybe that part was done. But standing alone did not mean standing silent. She looked the reporter dead in the eye. Fine. You want a statement. Here is my statement. I built it. I drew every line. I cleaned every floor that paid for its glass walls, and I will build it again, with or without his name on it. The story went live 2 days later. Julia did not watch it when it dropped. She sat at her small desk in the corner of the design studio, pretending to revise sketches while her phone buzzed every few minutes with calls she did not answer. She had done the thing she promised herself she would never do. She had stepped out of the shadows and said her own name out loud. By evening, the local news had picked it up. By morning, a bigger outlet reached out asking for a follow-up. She ignored them all. The only message she answered was her mother's. Her mother's voice cracked through the phone, asking in Spanish if this meant they would lose the apartment, if someone came looking for trouble. Julia promised they would not lose anything, but she did not know if that was true. The next night, she stayed late at the studio, wiping down drafting tables with the same quiet rhythm she once used to wipe down boardroom chairs. She liked the hum of the old radiators, the faint smell of ink, the sound of her own pen, scratching in the back of her sketchbook where no one else looked. She almost did not hear the knock on the glass door. When she looked up, Alexander Grant stood there, coat dusted with snow, hair damp, like he had walked the whole way. She wanted to look away, pretend she did not see him, but the space was too small, the truth too loud. She pushed open the door and stepped outside into the cold before he could bring the mess inside with him. "You should not be here," she said. He did not argue. "I know." She crossed her arms. "What do you want, Alexander?" He looked tired, the streetlight catching the lines under his eyes. "I wanted to see you." She almost laughed. "You have seen enough." He nodded once, like he agreed. "You are everywhere right now. Everyone is talking about the girl who drew an empire on the back of a bleach rag." She bristled. "They are not my words." He looked at her carefully. "No, but they are not wrong. You did build it, Julia." She stared at him, the frost in the air biting at her throat when she breathed. "And you buried it." He did not flinch. "I tried to save it. The board would not listen." She shook her head. "Do not stand here and tell me you had no power. You own the walls they want to tear down." His jaw worked, but no excuse came out. He pulled something from his coat pocket, a folded sheet of paper. She did not reach for it, so he unfolded it himself, holding it where she could see. It was not a blueprint this time, but a notice. He was stepping down, effective immediately. She blinked. "What is this?" he said quietly. "It is the only leverage I have left. If I step away, they lose the right to my name on the project. They lose the name Grant Holdings for what it is worth." Julia's heart thudded, but her voice stayed steady. "Why should I care?" He exhaled a breath that frosted in the streetlight. "Because they will look for someone else to blame for the fallout, someone whose name is easier to drag." She knew he was right. If he disappeared and she stayed, they would circle her like wolves again until every sketch, every line turned into proof she was never more than a janitor who got lucky. She stepped closer, so close she could see the flake of snow caught on his collar. "Why are you telling me this?" He searched her face for something she could not name. "Because if you want to fight them, you should know the cost. If you want to build it again, you will have to do it with eyes on you every minute, every rumor, every lie." She wanted to scream at him that she already knew that cost. She had paid it since the first day she held a mop and called it safety. Instead, she asked softly, "And if I do not want your name tangled in mine?" He almost smiled, but it died on his mouth. "Then untangle it. Stand in the light by yourself. I am not here to hold you up. I am here to step aside." Julia felt the street tilt under her feet. For so long she had wanted him to get out of her way, but now that he was offering, she felt the raw edge of the choice he was handing her. If she said yes, there would be no one left to point at when the city whispered. There would only be her lines, her voice, her face. In the glass she once polished for someone else's reflection, she took the paper from his hand, folded it without looking at it, and slipped it into her bag. "Then go," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, like he was memorizing the curve of her mouth, the stubborn line of her shoulders. Then he nodded once and turned away, stepping into the snow without asking for anything back. The next day, Julia called the same reporter who had knocked on the studio door. She told him to meet her in the place no one expected. She did not stand on the steps of Grant Holdings or the studio where her name was now whispered behind closed doors. She chose the hallway where she had once cleaned coffee stains off polished tile at 3 a.m. When the cameras showed up, she did not flinch at the questions. She held up her sketchbook, open to the same page Alexander had traced with his thumb that night in the boardroom. She told them her name, her mother's name, the story of the corner room, the open chairs, the dream that was never his to own. One reporter shouted, "What do you want from this?" Julia looked straight into the lens, her hands steady on the weathered spine of the sketchbook. "I want people to know that what you build with your own hands belongs to you, even if someone else tries to put their name on the door." She did not mention Alexander. She did not thank him or curse him or defend him. He had chosen to step aside. She chose not to drag him back into a war that was hers to finish. Later, when she returned to the studio, her boss handed her a thin envelope. Inside was a permit slip signed and sealed, a tiny corner lot on the east side, an old laundry closed for months, the owner too tired to keep fighting with the bank. Julia read the address 3 times before looking up. Her boss shrugged. "You have an idea for it?" Julia smiled for the first time in weeks. "I have a lot of ideas." The city did not quiet overnight. There were more questions, more rumors, more stories that got the shape of her face wrong. But she did not hide. She showed up every morning. She rolled up her sleeves, wiped down the old walls of the laundromat, and sketched new ones on scraps of cardboard when no one was looking. One night, just before the new year, she found a small package wedged under the door. No note, no name, just a plain cardboard box. Inside was her old badge from Grant Holdings, the plastic cracked from where it had been bent too many times. Taped to the back was a scrap of blueprint paper. On it, one line in his handwriting: "Open space lives where you do." She folded it carefully, tucked it into the same sketchbook that had survived every rumor, every lie, every hallway. Julia Reyes did not need a billionaire's name anymore. She did not need the marble floors, the cold glass, the safe corner of someone else's empire. She had her own door, her own walls, her own light. When the first paint went on the outside of the old laundry, she dipped her brush in soft white, watched it drip, and thought about the first time she had wiped a wall clean, for a man who thought he could hand her a world that was already hers if she wanted it. She smiled at the thought, then laid the brush to the wall, steady even, unafraid of what might stain it next. When spring came, the city felt softer somehow. Julia stood in front of the old laundromat, its cracked windows covered now with sketches and taped notes. Inside smelled of fresh paint and sawdust, and old dreams that refused to stay buried. She wiped her hands on her jeans, watching the kids from the neighborhood peeking through the glass, pointing at the big words painted above the door. Open space. No one asked who paid for it. No one asked if the man with the polished shoes was still part of the story. They saw her standing there, brush in hand, sleeves rolled up, sweat on her forehead, and they saw enough. Her mother came by once, leaning on her cane to inspect the walls, tapping them like she could test if they were strong enough to hold her daughter's stubbornness. She did not say much, just nodded once, and left a small bag of sweetbread on the counter. Julia ate it cold that night, sitting cross-legged on the floor staring at the space she was building with her own hands. A week later, someone left a small envelope under the door again. Inside was a thin slip of paper. No name, no signature. It was a simple donation form, the box for anonymous checked, and a number scrawled beside it that made her laugh and shake her head. She tucked it away, not because she needed it, but because some ties did not have to be tied tight to matter. When the lights finally came on the night before opening, she stood alone in the middle of the wide room. The walls were not marble, the windows did not reach the sky, but the air felt open, warm, exactly as she had drawn it years ago on the back of an old receipt between shifts. She thought about Alexander Grant for the first time in weeks, wondered if he ever sat in a room that felt big enough for him. She hoped he did, but she knew it was no longer her job to build it for him. The first kids came in shy and curious, trailing their fingers along the fresh paint. They asked if they could sit anywhere, and she told them every chair was theirs. She watched them settle into corners she had once only imagined, watched them fill the empty spaces with noise and stories and new lines that had nothing to do with glass towers or cold boardrooms. When she locked up that night, she paused by the door, tracing the letters with her thumb. Open space. A room that did not care if you started as a cleaning girl or a billionaire or nothing at all. A room that stayed yours if you had the guts to claim it. Julia Reyes stepped out into the night, pulling her jacket tighter against the soft wind. She knew the city would still whisper her name in dark corners. Some people would always think they knew her story better than she did, but they would never know how it felt to stand in the quiet after the lights went out and realize you were not waiting for someone else to open the door for you anymore. She smiled to herself, turned the lock, and whispered the only truth she needed. We started right here, and we did not stop.